Niyama Shang here, and thank you so much for letting us be a part of your journey here today. We are in for an Outliers Edge roundtable where we're going to get into an incredible conversation with Evan Unger. Evan, I'm glad that you're here today for this conversation. Thanks so much for making the time for it. Thanks for showing up, and thanks for being an outlier in such a way that we could even find each other to have this conversation.
It's my pleasure and privilege. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, same here. Same here. Like Evan and I were talking beforehand, and one of the things that I get about Evan is that he's incredibly intentional, but at the same time very expansive in both like meeting the moment and actually like having fun along the way. And so, in that element of like both meeting the moment, expanding, up leveling, and having fun, Evan, would you mind sharing with us a bit about you and the game you are playing?
Yeah, so I go back a ways. I got out of business school in '89, went and worked for a giant pharmaceutical company, Merck. They had a rotational assignment for MBAs, like what I was doing. Then they just made up this job called the Director of Change Leadership and Development, which, in all honesty, was a fancy title for I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like 3 years out of business school. New CEO comes on board. He does his assessment. He's not happy. People aren't collaborating, right? And somehow it rolls down to me running this major re-engineering change project to get people collaborating. I'm like, get people collaborating? I don't know anything. So what I did is I hired an outside consultant. That's who I work for now. And the game I'm playing, for decades, I've been doing culture change and transformation. Now, at this age, I'm simply teaching people a style of leadership that change agents need, right? Outliers need to drive transformation in their organization. So I'd say that's the game I'm playing at this age.
I love this element of like, well, two things. One, I love that you talk about change agents inside of
Right.
organizations. I think sometimes, like in the Outliers Edge platform, we bring a lot of people who are other entrepreneurs, and we're focusing on like the entrepreneurial game alone. But we're missing that like outliers like continue to exist inside of their spaces, and
Yeah.
they're looking to create some kind of change, some like they're looking to create some kind of difference from where they are right now. So I actually get really excited to explore this from like the change agent perspective here. I don't know if you knew this, but I had a background in company culture for at a tech company here. My the whole thing was how do we like foster and bring about and unify the culture across our global organization. So even now, I still think I'm playing a culture game. It's just that instead of trying to move an entire organization, I'm moving the organization of a person right now.
Yes.
So yeah, it all feels really real like aligned. So why don't we do this? I want to spend a little bit of time in your journey because you've had some great things take place. Let's see here. The parts that I'm curious about here is like you talked about like building out your career, doing like culture and transformation in that space, and then you made a change and a pivot. Like tell us about like what was going on right before the pivot. What led to that change, and let's pick up the story from there.
Yeah. So for decades, right, we were teaching leaders how to facilitate complex collaborative decision making, right? Process improvement, the agile ceremonies, launching teams, visioning, planning, which I did with senior teams. And we would always train the change agents how to do this. So this is going on for decades, Niyama, where we're sitting in a room together, right? And so for decades, I'm training people how to do this. And clients started saying when Skype and GoToMeeting and Live Meeting came along, Evan, can you teach us how to facilitate on screens like we're on right now? And in all honesty, I resisted it for a long time because I was like, why do I want to train people on screens? So the big pivot point was at the pandemic when everything went virtual, right? Everything was in lockdown. And in all honesty, I got pretty depressed because all the work I had was face to face. It evaporated overnight as a consultant because I'm training people face to face. So it took me a little while, a few months to figure out everything I've been doing applies sitting on screens. And so I reinvented myself entirely. I shut down the consulting business because I just love training people how to facilitate complex collaborative conversations when we're leading other people.
So I'm curious about a couple things here. I'm curious about like the actual change that you made, like the pivot to that, it strikes me that you shut down the consultancy in order to focus right in here. I love you're gonna find in my on my platform. I love when people own who they are and what they love. You know, you're like, this is what I love to do. So why don't I just focus on that? You know, Te- yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I mean keep going because
Yeah,
I'm looking at your background on LinkedIn. You worked for Deloitte, right?
yeah,
Early in
yeah.
your career, giant, almost 500,000 consulting firm. Merck, giant. It was at the time I think it was about 100,000 employees. In a big organization, it is draining,
Mm,
right? It
mm,
is draining,
mm.
and it was really hard for me at Merck to find my place
Yeah,
because it's so bureaucratic.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
why I left Merck to become an outside consultant.
yeah.
And, consulting requires a lot more work than training. And so I'm at a point in my life, work life balance wise, where training people is a lot easier than doing real consulting work.
So tell us a bit here. Like I want to just see a bit of like the elements of what you're training on, right? Because I take it that you also love this work here. So when you talk about I can't remember all the exact words, but it's like complex. How would you say
Well,
you help leaders?
complex collaborative decision making meetings, right?
Yes.
And so let me give you a couple of questions I've asked clients for over 33 years, right? I've asked
Yep.
them two questions. One, how many meetings are going to take place in your organization today, 24 hours worldwide? If I ask that of some senior leader at Deloitte, they're probably going to say a million meetings, right? There could be
Mm-hmm.
more. The second question I have asked clients, what's the average effectiveness of a typical meeting that you run in your organization? Actually, that you participate in. Everyone likes to think their own meetings are well run. And I would say 90% of the time, people tell me a number lower than 50%. And I sit with clients and I say, this is insane. I mean, literally insane from a business productivity standpoint, because you may run a giant company 200,000 meetings today. No one ever says 70%, but that's a C minus. And people never add it up. The more senior you are, Nima, you are going to be in a lot of meetings. And if you're spending 50% of your time in meetings, you are literally going to spend a year's worth of your life in hours in meetings in under 9 years. How organizations tolerate this, I have no idea, but they do. And it literally drains the health out of an organization. And it is the fundamental leadership issue because when I take people's time to meet, I better use it well because if I waste their time, people are going to see me as a bad leader.
There's this component as you say this. I think is really what's striking me right now is you know how they ask the question generally like how many people think that they're above average, and then
Yeah.
it's like there's way more than the average people, right? And so like I'm playing out what you're saying right now when you're like when people are like, well, how good do you think your meetings are? They're like, oh, it's at least like 80% better, right? And it's like if you get 80% of the people say that it's 80% better, you know that something's off there,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and I think the classic question is, do you think you're above average driver? And I'm very clear, I'm not. You look at my
Yeah,
car, I got all sorts of dents. I never want to buy a new car because I know I'm going to ding it
yeah,
within the first month. But that
yeah.
is exactly the case. People overestimate their effectiveness leading other people. And we can think about meetings as the fundamental building block of the culture of the performance of the organization. I don't know if you ever read Patrick Lencioni's The Five Dysfunctions of Teams, right?
I haven't read. I've read some of his other books, but I haven't read that one.
Yeah, his first book was Death by Meeting, right? There's a
Uh,
great quote in there, something like this. The hard truth is that when we run bad meetings, it almost always leads to bad decisions, which is a recipe for mediocrity. Performance mediocrity, productivity loss, morale cratering in an organization, because if I have to go to all these horrible meetings, it drains the success and the energy of the organization and the people in it, but it's a recipe for something else. If I'm the one running that 50% or below, and I'd say even 80% or below, that's a B minus, right? That's not very good. It basically is a recipe for people seeing me as a bad leader because people, they don't hate meetings. They really don't. What they hate is wasting time. And so many meetings are a complete waste of time. They shouldn't be allowed to happen. And if you're the one running all these meetings that waste people time, people are going to see you as an ineffectual leader because that's where they're experiencing you in a big organization in some form of meeting.
All right, so I'm going to ask you two questions. One of them is going to be more of the standard question, and the other one's going to be more of the Niyama question, right? So the standard question here would be like, if there's like one or two things that you might recommend to any outlier right now who's like, I'm about to go to a meeting right afterwards,
Yep.
like, like yeah, I'm going to hear this in 2 minutes and then I'm going to run.
Right.
What would you say? What are one or two things you would say like could drastically improve the effectiveness of their meetings?
Yeah, I'm going to offer a simple model, right? The metaphor we might use for running a meeting, a project, a task force, right? A consulting engagement is the metaphor of a plane flight. Three parts to a plane flight. I'm in Denver, you're in San Diego, if I understand. If I come to visit you, right? Takeoff is everything, right? I time it every time. I'm going to be getting on a plane to DC tomorrow. I will time every time how long it takes from the time they hit the jets to wheels up. It's usually about 30 to 40 seconds. If it does not go well, we are all dead, right? It is over. And it's the same principle in a meeting, a project, a task force, a consulting engagement. Everything has to do with how we take off, right? So the model I would tell people is you should not be allowed to have a meeting. You should not be allowed to let that plane on the tarmac into the jetway if you haven't thought through 5 questions. One, why are you having the meeting at all? Two, what the heck are you trying to get done? Because if I don't know I'm trying to get to San Diego, I'm going to end up down at LAX in LA, right? If I don't know why we're doing things, what we're doing, I can't design a flight plan, which is the process for the meeting. I can't think about who really should be the passengers and the roles I need them to play. And I can't think about the agreements for how we interact. So the model your listeners should be thinking about, we call it the Popper model. P stands for the purpose, O stands for the objectives, the second P stands for the process, the R stands for the roles, and the A stands for the agreement. So if you can't answer why, what, how, who, in what way, you shouldn't be allowed to have a meeting. So that's the minimum threshold for you being allowed to take people's time, being able to answer those questions on takeoff.
All right, we got to say those again. And like, let's say it again slowly because Veronica's on the team. She's gonna like put this into the comments so that people
Yeah.
can get a chance. We're gonna bring it up here. What can you tell us the Papa framework one more time?
Yeah. So the acronym is POPRA, POPRA.
Hmm.
The first P is the purpose for the meeting and all the context, right? Why we're having the meeting. The O are the objectives or the goals or the deliverables for the meeting, what we're trying to get done.
Mm.
The process is the flight plan or how we're going to do it. Now, in a meeting, you would call it agendas, but there's a lot more detail to run a facilitated meeting, process wise, tools, techniques. We teach people this. The roles, right, are in a meeting, it's the timekeeper, the scribe, the tech facilitator, my role running the meeting, the SMEs, but also who's the decision maker in the meeting. And the agreements are how we need to interact, right? Stay focused, let's not multitask. Who ultimately decides that we can't reach consensus? So that's the POPRA model. It's like opera, which you put a P in front of it, which is the POPRA, and it is a song we sing every time we run a
I
meeting,
like
because
that.
if
I
it's
like that.
not clear, if I can't answer those questions for myself first, and then when I'm taking off in the meeting or workshop with the participants, I am going to waste their time because I will bounce off other people's destinations for my meeting.
So I want to just like slow down with this in particular and just think about like even how we started out our conversation. So this right here, we're talking about this within the context of complex collaborative decision
Yeah.
making, all right, and the importance for leaders and sort of organizations to be able to do this to like leverage the time and effectiveness of each meeting that they have in their organization. Um, the I love this. I'm thinking about this here, even with just the way that you and I had our conversation to even start out before we got onto into this space. So essentially, I'm like, this feels like even though it's for meetings and we have a very specific purpose for it, outliers like I'm like, I think you can leverage this for every single conversation of importance, right? If you want it to be meaningful,
Yeah.
I think that is what I'm hearing is a framework for how do you have meaningful conversations and making sure that you have like you're able to get even more leverage with the teams that you're bringing together and having
Yeah.
meetings out of organizations. But it feels very intentional, very meaningful, and for people to actually feel like they're contributing and things are moving forward at the end of every single like conversation you have. What do you make of that, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, we teach people 5 things in the Popper model. And we teach them many things, but there's 5 core things. Takeoff framing is everything. To have an effective project, task force, workshop, right? Now, when we're flying the plane, right, people need some tools and techniques to know how to hold voices or hold space for all voices. It's often the middle-aged white guy like me who might be the senior vice president who comes in, thinks he's the smartest person. He's working with people more junior than him in the meeting. He scares everyone. No one says a word. So we need good process structure because it often can be the most junior person who is the outlier. But if they're an introvert or a person of color, right, or speaking English as a second or third language, most of the time they don't have space to weigh in. So it is my job as the collaborative leader to hold space for all voices, right? The third thing we teach them is how do you handle challenging people, in particular, challenging senior people. I don't know if you've ever heard the agile term hippo decision making, but here's what it
No, tell me
stands
more
for.
about that.
We've all been there. The hippo is the highest paid person's opinion, right? It's the CEO or the CEO, whoever the senior person is, right? They're the hippo. And it's very hard to manage the dynamics when I have mixed hierarchy and there's political power and control, right? So we teach people how to manage and intervene in challenging situations. The fourth thing, and when we talk about landing, is as important as takeoff because most workshops, most meetings, most projects don't land well. And we both know, having been a consultant, all the work for a high stakes meeting is what you did before you show up. The change agent work, getting stakeholders aligned, and running the complex collaborative meeting is running the X's and O's. But the work is the change agent work before you ever get there. So that's what we're teaching folks. And it's all intentional. Everything, it's all intentional and it's learnable. And most people are never trained. And what I always encourage people, the bar is unbelievably low. People are horrible at this. So you can be an outlier with just these 5 fundamentals immediately because no one knows how to do this stuff very well. And you see people and you know they're good at it immediately because they get people to make great decisions, get them to buy in and go implement.
This is wonderful. I like, so, like as we're having this conversation, I want us to hear exactly as Evan is saying, and I'm also like I'm listening to this. I'm like, this is just a great, uh, it's a great framework. And part of what I think about, like when I hear like different people's frameworks and the way that they go around it, is like how universal is it? Is it does it like does it just make sense because it happened to be 3:42 p.m. and you're in this like specific coordinates, or is it something that's like, oh, every time I try and apply this, I can see how the framework would work out. And that's
Yeah,
one of those things where I think is really beneficial about like what you're talking about, Evan. Like it feels like it leverages so much. Like
yeah,
even me, like when I'm thinking about like in my next podcast conversation, how am I doing takeoff? Like
yeah,
like how am I
yes,
bringing people into the space when we're having the actual conversation? What like I oftentimes have multiple people in a conversation at the same time. So like how do we manage that dynamic with me being host, with them being guests, with them all of them being that may not be the each of them is a hippo in their own regard,
yeah,
but like, like how do we manage like multiple leaders in this conversation coming together? And to your point, Evan, like it's an hour of their time, how do we make sure that like they leave here feeling like it wasn't just like good things happened, it was a good conversation, it wasn't a bad use of time, but how do we get it to like it feels constructive? And so I'm using your framework and thinking through like the problems that you're solving and the ways that like the things that your framework solves, as an example of different ways that we can look at like every conversation we have as a meeting
yes.
and seeing where we can go. And if you are one of those leaders who are in organizations, or you're a change agent that is like, I need to like I'm tired of having my projects fail,
Yeah.
like not get off, take off, or fall somewhere in the middle. Evan, what's the best way for outliers to like contact you or to go deeper down the journey with you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, probably the easiest way. You can get to my website or landing page from LinkedIn. If you're watching this, which I doubt you are, I'm wearing a blue check shirt. There's surprisingly 6 Ungers on LinkedIn, right? Which surprised me, but I'll be the one with the goofy grin. You can click on and get to my information there. But it's interesting, as you said that, Nima, you were doing Popera before we started, right? Because we talked about why, you want to run the podcast. Give me some context
Mhm,
around what your audience is, what you're trying to get done with outliers. And
mhm,
then we had a conversation about what you wanted to try to get done in this and now you're running the process for
mhm.
how you execute a conversation. And eventually we're getting close to landing, right? So
Yeah.
you'll have to land this. But that's what we were doing before we started rolling tape here, is just getting the popper aligned so that when we run the process, it actually is effective and we get the results. or the objectives we want to achieve. So I love that we did that pre-conversation.
And like this is Evan, what I'm realizing is the difference between success and failure in my own world. When I think about when I do popra versus not,
Yeah,
like when I take the time to even like the levels of agreements, okay,
yeah.
like us being able to get clear, hey, is there editing that takes place, is there not,
Yes,
like, like all of that was done at the very beginning, so that when we're now in this space, we're able to like have high leverage such that we're able to even like reference on a meta basis
yes,
what took place. Like it's
yeah,
but it's that consistent, it's that
yes.
aligned.
It's universal, right? Because
Yeah.
you have a role to play right now in the podcast. I have a role to play, right?
Hmm.
And there's agreements we were talking about. It's like, can I rework things? No, we want it organic, right? Can I restate things? You were giving me agreements around. Look, I kind of want to end this at about the top of the hour. Great.
Yeah.
I need to know that before we start. So it applies. Just think about if you have kids, right? Here's
Hmm.
a great example. You have a popper with your children doing homework.
Hmm.
There's a reason why they need to do their homework, right? And there's all this context. But you may have a conversation, a coaching conversation with your teenager. Let's talk about what you're trying to get done here. And let's come up with some ideas for how you may approach getting your homework done. Let me talk about my role as the parent and your role as the student. And let's agree you need to get B's at a minimum. Okay, so I've trained people worldwide, China, Russia, all over Western Europe, I wouldn't say every culture. It is universal. I've trained people, you looked at my LinkedIn page, from so many different industries, small nonprofits, giant global companies, and of all different backgrounds, doctors, lawyers, I've trained engineers, scientists, man, it does not matter what your technical background is. It does not matter what culture or country you're from. And it doesn't matter the industry you're in, because we're always going to have to get other experts to collaborate. And so what we're doing is universal, to your earlier point, and it applies everywhere. These are life skills in addition to business skills.
Yes, and it's great that you're working in a place where people are able to get high leverage and turn them into business results. Like I'm going to invite something, if you're cool with it, Evan. I'm going to invite something to Outliers here. Outliers. So my normal request would be like, all right, go on through the rest of your day and leverage Popra. All right, put that in, like, go out and like for every conversation, every meeting that you have, like sit down and take the time to establish each of them. That's how I would normally request of you. And like, as you know, this is not a listening platform. It's an experiential platform. Like we get things done and we do things here as Outliers. So that's my invitation one. My second invitation though is to like you might be like, I'm not leading any like conversations today. Fine. My ask of you is to actually spend time in every single conversation and just
Yes.
write out POPRA over and over again, like the
Yep.
POPRA, right? And see if you can identify like if that was actually like established like in the
Yeah.
conversation, and then take a look at it and do like basically your own audit on yourself for the conversations you've been a part of and the conversations you like that you're leading. Like how much were people doing these activities, and then you
Yeah.
can even rate it and see like what were the conversations that worked, what were the meetings that were actually felt worthwhile, and what felt like this could have been an email. Like, and that's usually like I feel like when that's missing, they're like, just why wasn't this just an email?
Yeah, and if I don't know why and what, I can't decide what the right process is. Meeting, email. But your point's a very important one. One-on-one is a
Yeah.
meeting, and if
Yeah.
I'm a junior person going to a hippo, I better
Yeah.
be crystal clear why I'm talking to that person, the context she or he needs, before we execute the conversation, what we're trying to get done. Are we trying to make a decision? Am I just trying to get feedback from the person? And I better have some process for how I want to run the conversation like we're having. And there may not be roles per se, although she or he may be the ultimate decision maker. And I want to say, look, I'm going to give you some options. You get to decide. And my agreement might be something as simple as, can I just explain a few things before we jump in and start doing problem solving? Right.
Mhm.
And Popper applies one on one, it applies everywhere. And again, it's so obvious, Nima. It's like nothing we're doing here is rocket science. But most of the time, people go into a conversation and they just wing it,
Mhm.
and they waste that hippo's time. And I can tell you, waste hippo's times, your reputation as a leader, sometimes you don't get a second swing. All
Yeah.
right. There's times you do not get a second swing if that doesn't go well.
Yeah. Yep, yep. Like it's wild, Evan. Like there's um I'm grateful for this conversation right now because like I my day is full of conversations, you know. And there are I'm thinking to it, and most of my conversations are recorded and shared out with people, so you can actually see the track record of it all. But I'm thinking about how where I've slipped in creating that, you know, where like what kinds of agreements I could be creating or asking or putting into the space to have more. My language, I'll say more powerful conversations,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, but it's more effective conversations, however it comes through. Like, and so I'm grateful that like this is just one of the frameworks that you have, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm grateful that like we can see just the power of Popper right here, and I'm doing an audit. I'm literally
Yep.
auditing myself. I'm like, I know what I'm going to do right after this. I'm like, I'm going to have to do that conversation differently because I can get by, but that's not what we're trying to get done anymore. We're trying to actually get high leverage, like from each of these complex, like collaborative decision making, like conversations we have.
Yeah, and now we get to the fourth of the five core things, which is landing, right?
Yeah.
And I want to build continuous improvement because every conversation, every high stakes collaborative meeting, it can go better. So when I land the plane, first of all, we don't manage time well. We don't leave time to land, right? If I stay with the plane metaphor, what happens is we jam pack our agendas with way too many things. We get behind on time and people drop out of the meeting room or the meeting and we didn't get clear what just happened, right? And where do we go from here? And we really do want to have continuous improvement built in, get feedback both for you as a leader and for the group. What needs to go better next time so
Mm.
we make better use of time? And feedback is a gift, and most people they don't ask it because a lot of people aren't for it because a lot of people aren't comfortable giving it. But if I as a leader, as an outlier, want to become better and better and better, feedback cycles, getting feedback from other people are essential. You and I, when we finish and stop tape, I'm going to ask you, is there any feedback you have for me? So if I were to have a podcast with someone else, it would be better because I know I'm long-winded. That's a given. And so, that's what I'm going to ask you because I want to be better the next conversation.
Yeah, this is trust me, on the other side of this year, I'm going to be asking you as well because I want to be better at the next conversation. And I think that this is actually like that element of like the consistent improvement, like continual improvement. I think that's really important for us as outliers in particular because like it's good for everyone with that's growth mind, like that's going after things and continuing to grow. But I think there's another component of like we're doing a lot of things that like there isn't necessarily a playbook to do overall, right? You're trying to create change inside of an organization. Well, the reason change is being created inside the organization is because it's not there right now,
Yeah.
you know? And so like there's the element of being able to uh consistently get better. And I think there's something about that component around like what I'm hearing from you is that it's embedded into the
Yeah.
process, like land in every conversation, every
Yes.
meeting gets better
Yeah.
than the next. It's what I get from that is that it changes from being like a discrete thing where like once a quarter someone's OKRs or like make this
Yeah.
meeting better or whatever it is, and it becomes one of those things where you actually get to have the exponential increase where it's like
Yes.
every conversation is 1% better than the
Yeah.
first than the last one, but like you get 30 conversations in 30 meetings in there, and you're like this feels night and day different
Yeah.
than where we started. And all I was doing was just making sure I kept the feedback cycles like close, tight, and not just getting the feedback in, but immediately implementing
Yes.
such that you can go in and see did that actually work or make a difference.
Yeah, and a facilitated conversation was with multiple people. Now, one thing you may want to think about is leadership, right?
Yes.
Often outliers have a vision that other people don't have.
Yes.
Now, to get people to change, I have to be able to articulate that vision. I have to create a case for change, right? What the pain is. And then I have to help those people see strategies or processes for how we get from the current state to that vision. Now, there's a statement, I don't know who said it, change agents often die, right? Because when we sit in a culture and we're too far ahead of where the culture is, a lot of times change agents, it's like they get pushed out of an organization because they're outliers. So there is a delicacy to how to do this. Now, leadership, there's you and I probably read who knows how many books over our careers on leadership, and there's so many ways to think about it. But here's the simplest, what we think one of the most powerful ways to think about leadership. Think about our leadership on a continuum. where there's two extremes. On, if you will, the left side of the continuum, you could be a leader that's the expert that tells people what to do, makes the decision for them, and says, go implement. That's a choice. Expert based leadership. Now, the other side, and this is where we're trying to teach people, is the real art of leadership. Even though you have strong opinions on what the change should be, right? You understand my role is to be an expert in how to get people to collaborate. I'm going to remain neutral because when I'm doing change, I have to hold the space to let the experts decide for themselves what the change looks like, what the strategy to get there is. And at times I have to go in the middle of the continuum and say, here's some expertise you need. But the real art of leadership, the real art of being a good consultant is understanding how to get the experts to come to their own answers, because then they'll own it and it's a better answer than me telling people this is what you need to do. Because I have a point of view and I have blind spots. There's no diversity, there's no creativity when I tell the group this is the answer.
Yeah, no, there's something in there, Evan, that feels really beautiful, and also like I appreciate you bringing it in there because it also feels really challenging, like
Oh, it is.
because like you sit there and you're like, but I do have the answer, right? Like,
Yeah, I'm the smartest. I'm the outlier. I'm the smartest person here. What are these other buffoons I'm having to deal with?
this is it's an important part, and it's something that like outliers like I know I'm going to be leveraging and sitting into that to improve along the way. Well, Evan, let's land this plane here today. I'm grateful for the conversation we have. I'm going to do this here with three questions. We'll keep each of them relatively quick, right? So the first one, the first two are going to come together. So, I'll give you the first two first, and then I'll give you the third one. What I'm going to ask you first is for an outsight. So an outsight is something that you would love for outliers listening to learn, take away from this conversation. If there's anything that you have there, if you can share that as well as like your contact information, the best way for some outliers to go deeper down the journey with you, that would be fantastic. So what's an outsight you have, and how can they go deeper?
Well, I guess I'll come back to my grandkids, right? I always told them there's a 5-point plan, and this goes back a long time. But three of the plan no longer is relevant because this is 20 years back. I used to tell them you have to learn Spanish, you have to learn Mandarin, and you need to go to school and get some sort of hard engineering degree. AI is changing all that. I'm not sure we need to learn languages. I'm not sure we're even going to be here as people doing the engineering, certain software. But the insight I always told them was two things. And I'd encourage young outliers to do this. When you're done with college, grab a backpack, travel around the world for a year. Fundamental to changing our view of the world. Secondly, while you're on that year-long journey, go do a 10-day silent meditation, because you will learn the art of how to manage your internal state and not react to things that are happening in the outside world. So those are the two things I'd encourage any young outlier, frankly, any young person to do before they take their first job, right? Because once you're in there and you have kids, it's very hard to get unlocked, right? Because it's not easy to be an outlier. And it's like, I'm going to go do this. And I've got 3 kids, right? Because now I'm not just on my own, I've got real responsibility. So go travel and do a 10-day silent meditation. That would be my first piece of advice.
I appreciate that, Evan. I appreciate like one of the things I appreciate about you is that there's a practicality to you, but it's also like it's not just practical in a specific domain. You're like, no, like honestly, like this is the advice I literally give this to my grandkids. So thank you for that. And what's the best way for people to go deeper down the journey? You mentioned it. I want to make sure that it's top of mind for outliers.
Yeah, if they go to my LinkedIn page, they can get to my website and they'll land on the landing page on what the program is. And it's an intensive, Nema. It's a 4-day, it's separated out, intensive boot camp. There's only 12 people, 2 instructors, because human beings learn by doing, not being lectured at. And most of the program is people on the hot seat having to practice, having to get feedback, have to give feedback, because what we want is real skill transfer. And we do not learn things watching podcasts, watching videos, right? We learn by doing, and everyone knows it. But in this day and age, everyone wants to say, give me self-paced learning, right? So I have time, I can do it. It doesn't work. And I always ask, senior people, right? And they say, Evan, I just want some videos so my people can learn how to facilitate complex meetings. I always say, I'm not interested. Go find someone else going to waste your time and money. And some clients say, I'm the client. The client's always right. And I say, no, you're not right. And you absolutely know you're not right. And they say, what do you mean? I say, did you have kids who learn to drive? And they say, of course. I'll say, let me ask you a question. Would you have ever in your life let your children watch 10 2-hour videos on how to drive and give them the car keys? We never do that. It takes deep time to learn things. That's what we do. It's on my website. Love to have your listeners. If they're from a client not on my website, I always knock $2,000 off a first seat. It is the best thing they could do to help further their leadership. We'd love to see your listeners there.
All right, outliers. We know where to be. So I'll go check it out. I also really like just real time feedback. I love how you like had the visual connection. You're like, I wear like this shirt is the same one that's on my LinkedIn. I think that's so cool. I'm like, oh, like just putting it right in there, just getting a nice little that connection. And I also really I'm a big fan of intensives and actually
Yeah,
like taking the action. You see even in this
yeah,
space, it's like how do we actually like leverage this? Because outliers, if we're just hearing it and you're not taking action on it, you've wasted your time.
yeah,
Plain and
exactly.
simple. You've wasted your time, and we're not about that here. Last question for you, Evan, as we wrap, and the question I have for you is: we've given outliers your outside here. I want to put outliers to the side and now just focus on you. Every time I have a conversation, the reason to have it, the only reason to have a conversation is for it to be a life changing conversation in some way. I don't know how it is, like, but I am curious for you, like, what's an insight? What's something you're taking away from this conversation as you go out into the world?
It's interesting because when you reached out to me, I was like, is this really a good fit for me? And I looked at your list of podcasts. Like, I'm not sure I can add value to your podcast. And I think the insight for me is everything synchronicity wise can lead places you never would ever expect. And so I'm very grateful you reached out to me. And I just had such a good time. And I hope your listeners found this valuable. I loved it, Nima. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, I feel exactly the same way. I'm literally like, oh, we have to keep coming back to this. Every time I bring someone new on the team, all that's like, hey, check it out, Popra. Like, this is how we're gonna do conversations. It is intentional. This is how we're like this has been a massive unlock, and so I really appreciate you, Evan. Thank you so much for being you, bringing your energy, bringing your expertise, and bringing your experience to this conversation. Outliers, this is going to be us for today, but I want to say until the next time that we talk, go ahead and be you on purpose.